everyone, I'm Jo Fry and this is my channel Jojo Fry Rocks, and I thought I would make a follow-up video to my bass players video because I wanted to find out a little bit more about some of the most iconic female bass players in rock. And I know who some of them are, obviously, because they're from some of my favourite bands, like kind of in the 90s. It seemed like there were quite a lot, actually, of female bass players in a lot of the bands that I liked. You know, in the Pixies, you had Kim Deal, and Darcy in the Smashing Pumpkins, Darcy Retzky. She was, you know, really, really, really cool, like really iconic. And it was great that there were these fantastic female bass players in a lot of the bands that I liked at the time. But then it started to almost become a little bit of a cliche or a stereotype. And it kind of started to feel like if you were a girl and you wanted to be in a band, then you can have the bass slot. You know, that's your gig. You can be the bass player. And I don't want to kind of disrespect any bass players because they are like crucially important to the sound of a band, obviously. But we all know that they get a lot of stick, and there's a lot of kind of sneeriness and kind of looking down noses at bass players for some reason. It's a really, really ridiculous stereotype. But I felt like there was something about that connection between people looking down on bass players and bands kind of letting a girl have that position in the band, like it's somehow lower down in the rankings than being, you know, the vocalist or the guitarist. So there was part of me that kind of felt quite resistant to that, and I didn't like that idea, and I didn't want to kind of be a cliche. So I almost deliberately, as a girl, did not show any interest in and never wanted to learn how to play the bass. And that is kind of a bit ignorant in itself and a bit silly, but that was just sort of how I saw things at the time, which, yeah, isn't great. But consequently, I've never got into it or known very much about it. But yeah, I think there are some others that I've heard of but don't necessarily know that much about, sort of like Tina Weymouth from Talking Heads. I really love Talking Heads, but I don't kind of know that much about her. So I thought I'd just kind of look up a little bit about them to kind of share with you, and share, you know, a couple of the most well-known ones. And yeah, just get your thoughts on who you think the greatest female bass players of all time are. I already talked about Julia Lage in my previous video, so I'm not going to kind of revisit that one again, just because, you know, she's one of my personal favourite musicians actually at the moment. But yeah, you can kind of go and check her out. But I think what I wanted to delve into on this video are the more kind of well-known, influential female bass players that, you know, I've probably heard of, but kind of don't know so much about. So I've done a little bit of homework and I'm going to share some of them with you. So somebody that I didn't really know very much about is someone called Kaye. Now, apparently, she's one of the most prolific bass players in the history of music. So I don't know how I've managed to not hear of her. So yeah, that's on me, obviously, and I suspect most of you probably know of her. But apparently she's played on over 10,000 songs in rock and pop music. She's been in the industry for 60 plus years. So yeah, she was kind of part of a collective of LA-based musicians called the Wrecking Crew, who I have heard of, actually. So yeah, she's obviously an immensely talented session player. She can be heard on everything from Richie Valens' La Bamba, like one of the most famous songs ever. These Boots Were Made for Walking by Nancy Sinatra, Scarborough Fair by Simon and Garfunkel, Good Vibrations by the Beach Boys. So, yeah, that is pretty impressive, like just those few. And there's like 10,000 more. So I really feel like she's somebody that I need to kind of know a bit more about, and I will be kind of looking up more of her stuff. Next is a bass player called Gail Ann Dorsey. Now, I have heard of her. I know that she was a touring bass player with David Bowie. So that's all I know about her. She's from Philadelphia, apparently. But she's also a singer and multi-instrumentalist. She plays guitar as well, so I didn't know of her for that necessarily. But apparently she's collaborated with everyone from Lenny Kravitz to Tears for Fears, Eric Clapton, Gwen Stefani, Lou Reed, loads of massive big names. As she's a multi-instrumentalist and can also sing, she's kind of done a lot of backing vocals as well with these bands when they perform. So yeah, she's got a very broad playing style, obviously very skillful, kind of fusing elements of funk, pop, rock into kind of everything that she does. And she also looks super cool as well. She's like she's got a real stage presence, which I think, you know, obviously is why she's been such a huge part of all these other bands and artists, sort of touring ensembles. In 2021, Bass Player magazine gave her a Lifetime Achievement Award. The next bass player is someone who is one of my favourite bass players, which is Kim Deal from the Pixies, because I do like the Pixies and I do think she's so cool. She's just absolutely awesome. You know, her bass lines are quite simple, but they are a key part of the sound of the Pixies, and it's almost really kind of where Nirvana came from. It's those sort of infectious hooks, if you like. It's a simple kind of recipe, but it's so effective. Like a master of minimalism, I guess. And then, of course, after the Pixies, she concentrated on her next project, which was the Breeders. You know, one of the kind of classic female grunge bands, who were also awesome. It was everything that 90s rock was about, you know, heavy guitars, growly vocals, punchy drums, and she could kind of create that infectious bass line that drives the song, and then on other songs just kind of blend in and kind of hold down the rhythm. It seemed like she just kind of had these instincts that brought everything together, really. Another female bass player that I wasn't really that aware of is Rhonda Smith, who was actually a bass player with Prince. But she also worked with Jeff Beck as well. She is apparently one of the most legendary bass players in the world. She was a professionally trained musician and graduated from McGill University in Montreal. So she studied jazz. She's done jazz albums herself. So, as well as working with Prince, she's also kind of worked with more contemporary musicians and acts like Beyonce. And, as well as doing kind of solo work herself. So she's kind of mainly a funk, jazz, kind of rock musician, but seems to be able to adapt to anything that's required as a professional musician should be able to do. I will obviously put some links in the description so that you can go and see some of her performances. One of the best ones that I've seen is with Jeff Beck. And she absolutely holds her own against kind of one of the greatest guitarists of all time. So yeah, it's kind of super interesting, really. I think, we can't talk about legendary female bass players without talking about Suzie Quattro, who is probably one of the only female bass players I can think of who was also actually the lead singer. And actually there aren't that many kind of lead singer bass players, really, if you think about it. Famously there's Lemmy, of course. But yeah, I can't really think of that many. Paul McCartney obviously is another one, but yes, Suzie Quattro, an absolute, monster of a musician, hugely influential, massively popular. She actually studied music from quite an early age. She started out on drums, I think, and classical piano, but she switched to guitar in an all-girl band when she was kind of a teenager at school. They were actually fairly successful. They were called the Pleasure Seekers. And then she was headhunted and offered a solo contract. So that was that, really. Obviously, there's not much I think I need to say about Suzie Quattro. You all know the rest. So yeah, just finishing off by coming back to someone that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, which is Tina Weymouth from the Talking Heads. She was actually a founding member of the band, with her husband, who was her boyfriend at the time, and is kind of like the main songwriter of the band as well. So, she's a massively talented all-round musician, hugely influential in that kind of early new wave style. She's someone who I think takes, again, quite a minimalist approach, but always serving the song. And I think that is probably one of the most important aspects of it. And I think it's the same with guitar, really. And I found a good quote from her, actually, which I think kind of sums everything up. She says, "I understand the Phil Spector wall of sound thing, but there comes a point where less is more." Which I think is absolutely true. And she kind of goes on to say that it would be easy to be flashy when you've been playing for 40 years or more, but I never wanted to be. It's like louder doesn't make you better. Being busier doesn't make the bass guitar more noticeable. It's about whatever works for the song. That's what you want to go for. It's pretty straightforward. So those are some of the more influential female bass players that I've kind of come across in my little bit of homework that I've done. But please do let me know who your favourite female bass players are and who I probably need to know more about. Let me know in the comments. Okay, thanks for watching. See you next time.